Thanks, Sophie. Welcome to Wales Today. I'm Lucy Owen. The headlines. A murder trial is told Joanne Penny was shot in the heart in Talbot Green as a result of a clash between drugs gangs.
The jury was told a starter pistol was used with ammunition adapted to make it lethal, and it was fired just over 2 metres away from the victim.
Also tonight, former First Minister Mark Drakeford admits a lack of preparation as the COVID inquiry looks at the impact on children.
I accept that the preparation wasn't adequate for what we ended up having to do.
We're in Caerphilly on the eve of a potentially historic by-election. Labour's dominance under threat from Reform and Plaid Cymru.
Stroke survivors and campaigners fighting to save the specialised unit at Bronglais Hospital gather at the Senedd, warning closing it would be devastating. And she was the last woman to be hanged in Britain. The grandchildren of Ruth Ellis tell us why they're seeking a posthumous pardon. Good evening, Noswaith Dda. A murder trial has been told that a 40-year-old woman was shot in the heart when a turf war between rival drugs gangs turned violent. In March, Joanne Penny opened the front door of a Talbot Green flat. A single shot was fired at her and she died moments later. 6 people have gone on trial at Cardiff Crown Court today accused of murder. Stephen Fairclough reports.
Joanne Penny opened the front door to see a gun pointing at her in March this year. The prosecution said she was instantly shot to the heart with a single bullet from a handgun at close range. She staggered back into the flat and died within minutes. The killing on a Sunday evening in March on a housing estate in Talbot Green in Rhondda Cynon Taf sparked a huge police investigation. The jury was told that Joanne Penny was killed in a clash over territory between 2 organised crime groups attempting to sell drugs in South Wales. The jury was told a Leicester gang had recently started selling drugs in the South Wales area. The prosecution said their arrival had not been taken well by another gang already operating in South Wales, who had on 2 occasions confronted and humiliated members of the RICO OCG in the Talbot Green area. The court heard that members of the RICO OCG discussed obtaining a gun and ammunition to send a message to their rivals. The jury was shown a video recorded the day before the shooting, which showed one of the defendants, Marcus Huntley, brandishing a gun which the prosecution say is the murder weapon, a starter pistol which had ammunition which had been converted to a lethal live ammunition rather than blanks. Along with Jordan Mills-Smith, the prosecution say that Huntley and Melissa Quayle-Dashper approached the door where Huntley fired the fatal shot after being driven there by other gang members. Marcus Huntley and Jordan Mills-Smith from Cardiff deny murder. Joshua Gordon, Melissa Quayle-Dashper, Christina Genova and Tony Porter from Leicester also deny murder and participating in the activities of an organised crime gang. The prosecution told the jury that while Huntley may have pulled the trigger, each of the defendants was jointly responsible for the murder. The trial is expected to last up to 9 weeks. Stephen Fairclough, BBC Wales Today, Cardiff Crown Court.
The former First Minister, Mark Drakeford, has told the UK COVID-19 inquiry in London that he accepts preparation wasn't adequate for the decision to close schools in March 2020. Mr Drakeford, who was First Minister at the time of the pandemic, has been giving evidence to the inquiry, which is hearing about the impact on children and young people. Here's our education and family correspondent, Bethan Lewis.
March 2020, and these were the final days in school for these pupils before weeks at home, uncertain about when they would return to classrooms.
Schools across Wales will close for statutory provision of education on the 20th of March.
When the announcement came on March the 18th that schools would be closing 2 days later, officials were scrambling to get arrangements in place. It was months before schools reopened, and even then the disruption and COVID-19 restrictions carried on, with the impact still being felt now. Mark Drakeford, at the helm at the time and giving evidence to the COVID inquiry today, said they'd been focused on keeping them open right up to the last minute.
I accept that the preparation wasn't adequate for what we ended up having to do. But I just remind once again that that didn't mean we weren't preparing. We were just preparing for something else. We were preparing for schools to stay open and to try to do everything we could to help them to stay open.
He was asked about safeguarding arrangements for vulnerable pupils and online learning. He said the pandemic exposed inequalities.
I think one of the things that was very apparent during the pandemic is the variable capacity of schools to make a success of online learning.
Schools are still dealing with the fallout, higher absence rates, reports of more social and emotional problems, and lower standards in numeracy and literacy. The former First Minister, now the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and the Welsh language, was asked whether he had any recommendations looking ahead. He returned to a policy he put forward as First Minister, but which has now been shelved.
I believe, for example, that extending the school day and reforming the school year are things that we ought to do while we have a different sort of opportunity to do so. Extending the school day, particularly for children who don't have access to opportunities that other children do, is one of the ways in which we could make a direct impact on that inequality issue that the inquiry has debated so thoroughly.
Yesterday, the former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson told the inquiry children had paid a huge price during the pandemic. Today, it was the former Welsh First Minister who was asked to reflect on a period which has had a lasting impact on schools and some children.
And Bethan joins me now. So we heard Boris Johnson talking about children paying a huge price during the pandemic. Did Mark Drakeford have a similar message?
Well, as we know, during the pandemic, these two leaders had very different approaches, and the focus today in Mark Drakeford's testimony was very different, more on the sort of detailed aspect of decisions made by Welsh Government and how they had an effect on children and young people. No mention at all of some key issues such as the exams fiasco in summer 2020, but more detailed reflections on things like children's rights. He was challenged by the Council for the Inquiry about whether processes had been followed. He said sometimes those formal processes weren't followed because of the pace of change during the pandemic, but that as a government they always reflected on children's rights as part of their processes. Now, they were challenged by the government, by the Children's Commissioner, during the pandemic, and he did say on one point that, looking back, he said they might have been able to do a bit more earlier to lessen, for example, the burden of face mask wearing by children. Now, the Children's Commissioner for Wales, the current Commissioner Rocio Cifuentes, gives evidence to the COVID inquiry tomorrow, and the former Education Minister Kirsty Williams at the time, she's given written evidence to the inquiry as well.
OK, Bethan, thank you very much. The cost of living increased by 3.8% in the year to September, according to the latest figures. So that means that something that would have cost you £100 12 months ago would now be £103.80. September's inflation figures are especially important to the many benefit claimants and state pensioners in Wales because they're often used to decide how much state support will be increased by next April. Here's our money editor, Felicity Evans.
The headline figure of a 3.8% rise in inflation is actually less than some forecasters were expecting, but it remains nearly double the Bank of England's target of 2%, and that means it's keeping up the pressure on household budgets. Although food price increases have slowed for the first time in over a year, they are still rising at quite a high rate, going up by 4.5% in the year to September. And because food is an essential spend, that hits poorer households particularly hard. Here's what these shoppers in Mould Market had to say about how the cost of living is affecting them.
Food shopping is, things seem to be going up and up every month. Things like butter and coffee seems to have gone up a huge amount over the last year, and I like coffee, so that's sort of impacted me a lot. But biggest thing for us has been energy costs.
I won't back down on what I want to buy as regards food. I think It's important to be healthy and eat what you're eating, and that if you cut back on other things, you can still enjoy the food that you've always enjoyed.
Don't go there as far as the heating. It's ridiculous. Your electric has gone through the roof. But it just seems everywhere you turn, it's gone up again. Something has gone up. You know, can you believe you're paying over £1 for a tin of Heinz baked beans? When did that happen?
Now, the September inflation rate is particularly significant because the UK government usually uses it to calculate how certain benefits, like universal credit, for example, will increase in the following April. And ministers have already promised to increase such payments by more than inflation. So today's figure means many claimants could see an increase of more than 6%. And that will impact a lot of people here in Wales, where the number of universal credit claimants reached a new high in September, with 418,000 people receiving the benefit. But the state pension, which is claimed by more than 650,000 people in Wales, will also increase by more than inflation because of the triple lock guarantee. Average total pay has increased by 4.7%, making it the highest of the three measures in the triple lock. And that means pensioners in Wales and the rest of the UK could see an increase of around £561.60 a year from April for those who hit state pension age after April 2016. And for those who reach state pension age before that date, they should see a rise of around £431.60. But for those of you wondering what the inflation figure means for interest rates, which affect the cost of mortgages and other borrowing, most analysts are expecting the Bank of England to keep rates unchanged next month.
Our money editor, Felicity Evans there. You're watching Wales Today, still to come in the programme. The trial of Ruth Ellis hit the headlines in the 50s. 70 years on, her grandchildren are seeking a posthumous pardon after she was hanged for murder.
And this deepening area of low pressure moving towards southern Britain has been named Storm Benjamin by the French Weather Service. France, Belgium and the Netherlands will be worst hit tomorrow, but what can we expect in Wales? Join me later to find out.
Now, after weeks of campaigning and political debate, sometimes heated, voters in Caerphilly will head to the polls tomorrow for a potentially historic Senedd by-election. The seat has been a Labour stronghold, with the party winning every Westminster or Senedd seat there for more than 100 years. Well, our political editor, Gareth Lewis, is in Caerphilly for us tonight. Gareth.
Well, Lucy, this could be really significant, so close to the Senedd election next May, and in an area, as you say, that Labour has dominated for more than a century. The First Minister has already described the Senedd election itself next year as one hell of a fight. It'll be exactly the same tomorrow, with polls suggesting that Plaid Cymru and Reform are very much in that fight with Labour. Throw in as well potentially even greater difficulties for the Welsh Labour government in passing its budget through the Senedd, were it to lose here in Caerphilly, and this is a by-election that could have far-reaching ramifications.
The talking's almost over, and it's time for voters in Caerphilly to decide. But whether the campaign's really built up ahead of steam apparently depends on where in Caerphilly you happen to be.
I found them to be quite intrusive, to be honest with you. I've had people knocking on my door morning, afternoon and evening, and I can't remember the last time I saw them. I think that's what's bothering me most.
And this is all the parties?
All of them, all of them.
Haven't seen any politicians canvassing, haven't seen any of my home here either. No.
Was that surprised you?
Yeah, I would have thought they'd be out in force, but I haven't seen anyone.
This is a Labour stronghold. The party has won every election here to Westminster for more than 100 years. Every Senedd election there's been. But from the moment the date of this by-election was announced, privately, some in the party were pretty honest about their chances. All that history could end up counting for nothing on Thursday.
One local has not only lived here all her life, but has also charted the course of Welsh history. And she's picked up on the potential for change.
Having looked at, been here, living in it, that there's much less excitement, there's much less engagement with the whole process than there was 50 years ago. Because people, perhaps, are very cynical these days. They don't believe what anybody says to them as far as politicians are concerned. and they're willing to question and to doubt everybody.
So why are expectations so low for Labour in an area where they're used to doing so well? Well, after 26 years in power in Cardiff Bay, there are question marks over their record on the NHS and education, and on spending priorities like the 20 miles per hour law and an expanded Senedd. There was an almighty row last year over donations and the resignation of former First Minister Vaughan Gething. And polls suggest that UK Labour and Prime Minister Keir Starmer are unpopular. Opposition parties sense their chance. Both Nigel Farage from Reform and Plaid Cymru leader Rhun ap Iorwerth have visited the constituency. Eluned Morgan has been here too, as has the Senedd Tory leader Darren Miller. This has been a heated campaign, especially during last week's live BBC debate. The NHS, trust in politicians and immigration have all featured, as have local issues, which was certainly on the menu at the cafe in the shadow of Caerphilly Castle.
There's hardly any transport. The buses have been stopped going into Cardiff, across the mountain. And it goes as far as the Heath Hospital, but it doesn't go as far as Cardiff Centre, which is where most people want to go.
The closing places like swimming pools and libraries. People see the library not only as a place to borrow books, but it's where they socialise as well. And a lot of people here, especially some of the elderly people, go to the swimming pools as well, because there they can do exercise.
Plans to close libraries were put forward by the local Labour-run council. The party's by-election campaign to keep them open has led to accusations of hypocrisy from some opponents who've all been trying to portray themselves as an appetising alternative to Labour, mindful that tomorrow could be a taste of what might come next May.
So, Gareth, it seems this really is all on a knife edge.
Yeah, Lucy, look, the chatter, the commentary around this campaign has been all about how tough Labour might find it. Would their opponents manage to seize the opportunity and topple them? In other words, is change on the way? So in one sense, in the immediate sense, in the context of the past 6 weeks, if Labour were to lose, it perhaps wouldn't be that much of a shock. However, in another sense, it would be absolutely enormous. Put it another way, just imagine going back in time and speaking to someone 100 years ago when Labour first won here, going back to 1999, the first Senedd election, going back to the mid-1980s at the height of the miners' strike and telling someone in this area that this is a part of the world that might turn its back on Labour, and they would have laughed at you. But this is serious stuff, you know, and whoever wins tomorrow in a part of the world that has already made its mark on history, we may well see this part of the world do that again, Lucy.
It's going to be very interesting. Our political editor, Gareth Lewis, in Caerphilly, thank you very much. And here is a full list of the candidates standing. Polls open at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning and close at 10 o'clock. And then the count will take place overnight. We'll have plenty of coverage on Friday all across BBC Wales outlets for you. And if you'd like more information, you can scan the QR code with your tablet or your phone. Stroke survivors say potential plans to close the specialised unit at Bronglais Hospital in Aberystwyth would be devastating. Campaigners gathered to voice their concerns on the steps of the Senedd earlier, as plans to remove the hospital's stroke unit were debated in the chamber. That debate came after a petition to save the unit gathered more than 17,000 signatures. Hywel Dda University Health Board says change is needed to meet clinical standards. Caris Notley reports.
An early start for these campaigners, setting off from their homes in Machynlleth and Aberystwyth this morning to travel more than 100 miles to Cardiff Bay with one clear aim: to help protect what they say are vital services at Bronglais Hospital. Hywel Dda Health Board is considering closing the stroke unit at Bronglais and introducing a so-called treat and transfer service instead. Karen and Ruth have both had a stroke in the last few years. They say closing the unit would mean patients like them would face long and risky transfers to hospitals in Llanelli or Haverfordwest.
We need Bronglais, and they are brilliant. There's no way when you're ill you can travel this way. We've got no motorway. The roads are dreadful. If I'd have had to travel all that time and mileage, perhaps things could have been a lot different.
I had a stroke 2 years ago. I had a small bleed on my brain, and I was lucky that I lived in Aberystwyth at the time, and the staff were outstanding.
Brendan lost his speech and mobility in his left side after having a stroke 2 years ago. He says having to travel hours for rehabilitation would have been unthinkable.
The whole process is not just about medical treatment per se, but also the emotional treatment you get from having friends and family around you. That's very important because they are motivational, and motivation is half the battle.
After reaching almost 18,000 signatures, the petition was debated by members of the Senedd this afternoon.
Forcing patients to travel huge distances to Haverfordwest and Llanelli, which is a round trip of 200 miles or more, especially on a poor transport infrastructure, is totally unacceptable.
Each time a service moves elsewhere, the case for keeping others weakens, slowly undermining, in this case, Bronglais' viability.
It is a decision for the Health Board, but we cannot continue to accept the status quo of poor outcomes for stroke. We have to change the way we provide acute stroke care to save more lives and improve quality of life after a stroke.
In a statement, Hywel Dda University Health Board says it recognises the strength of feeling towards the services it provides across Mid and West Wales, but that its stroke services need to change to meet clinical standards and to deliver better care for communities. It added that following a consultation this summer, work is ongoing and it doesn't have a preferred option at this stage. For these campaigners, they wait to find out what the future of their services looks like, with a decision due at the start of next year.
70 years ago, 28-year-old Ruth Ellis became the last woman to be hanged in Britain. The nightclub hostess from Pryl was executed at Holloway Prison in London after being convicted of murdering her partner, David Blakely. Now her grandchildren are seeking a posthumous pardon for her, saying she was physically and emotionally abused by Blakely before she killed him. Her family say if the case had taken place in modern times, the impact of the domestic abuse she suffered would have been taken into account, and the outcome would have been very different. They've been speaking to our reporter, Sarah Easdale.
On June the 21st, Ruth Ellis was found guilty of murder at the Old Bailey and sentenced to death in accordance with the law.
It was 70 years ago that Ruth Ellis was found guilty of the murder of David Blakely, her racing driver boyfriend, who she shot dead outside a London pub in April 1955. Their relationship was volatile, with infidelity on both sides, but there was violence too. Ruth Ellis was physically abused by David Blakely, including being punched in the stomach, causing her to have a miscarriage. She was abused by her former husband, George Ellis, too, and by her own father before that. The story of a glamorous woman turning a gun on her adulterous lover had all the ingredients to cause a public sensation, but any abuse that she'd suffered was disregarded as a defence in the trial. And the defence of diminished responsibility only came in 2 years after she was executed. A new drama about the case, televised earlier this year, as well as a new book released 2 years ago, led her grandchildren to engage lawyers to put right what they say is an historic injustice.
There was extensive evidence of the domestic abuse. There's medical records, there's witness statements. And, you know, they really exposed the flaws in the trial in terms of how she'd been handled, and really exposed all the bias that was at play. Also, you know, the political bias in terms of there was a real movement towards the abolition of the death penalty. And, you know, I think the government wanted to show that they were firm on that. So there was so much at play here.
The application to the Justice Secretary David Lammy has been made by the law firm whose founder tried to secure Ruth Ellis a last-minute reprieve back in 1955. That mission failed, but it's hoped a posthumous conditional pardon could be possible.
The power itself, it's exercised by His Majesty the King, but on the recommendation of the Secretary of State for Justice. It's a very flexible power, so in the exercise of this power, he's able to consider things that a court would not be able to consider. So, for example, developments in the law, so the development of diminished responsibility and loss of control as partial defences to murder that would have been available to Ruth had it been part of our law at the time in 1955.
When crowds gathered outside Holloway Prison on the 13th of June 1955, it was the last time in Britain a woman was hanged. Now the wait is on to see if an acknowledgement will be made that it should not have happened.
Sarah Eastdale there. Well, we need to brace ourselves for Storm Benjamin. Derek can tell us what's in store. Are we likely to be hit hard then, Derek?
Well, I think Wales will escape the worst of it, Lucy. Having said that, there is a risk of localised flooding with some heavy rain. Strong to gale force winds could also bring down 1 or 2 trees and cause some travel disruption. So the French Weather Service have named this area of low pressure Storm Benjamin. As it interacts the jet stream to the south of us over the Bay of Biscay, it is going to deepen further as it tracks eastwards. France, Belgium, the Netherlands and the Channel Islands will bear the brunt of the storm, but some impacts from severe weather are likely in parts of the UK, including here in Wales. Heavy rain could lead to some localised flooding. Strong winds could cause minor damage, and expect some travel disruption as well. Now, earlier on today, it was quite nice in Newtown in Powys. Some lovely sunshine there to show off the autumn colours. But the weather's on the change this evening now. We've already got some rain in the south, and that will spread further northwards during the evening and night. Some heavy rain likely for most of us, although the northwest may stay drier. The wind picking up after midnight with lowest temperatures between 6 and 8 Celsius. And then tomorrow, this deep area of low pressure will continue to move slowly eastwards towards the Netherlands. Met Office yellow warnings have been issued. Heavy rain in the southeast, 20 to 30 millimetres, could lead to flooding in places. And we also have to watch out for strong to gale force winds in western counties. Wind gusts 45 to 55 miles per hour, likely to lead to some travel disruption, for example, on the ferries. So tomorrow then, it's going to be a windier day, a little bit of sunshine, but rain and showers in the west will become more extensive for a while. Some heavy showers likely with a risk of thunder, turning drier and brighter later in the afternoon with a few scattered showers. And a colder day to come tomorrow. Temperatures lower than today, only 9 to 12 Celsius. Gales on western coasts with those gusts over 50 miles per hour. Into Friday, another breezy or windy day with showers or longer spells of rain. Again, some heavy showers, a little bit of sunshine mixed in as well, and feeling chilly in the wind. And then on Saturday, the wind turns more northwesterly, so it is going to turn colder with a mixture of sunshine and showers. Some of the showers likely to be heavy, a risk of hail, and cold enough for a little snow on the mountain tops. Strong winds on the north and west coast. Again, it will feel chilly. And then on Sunday, a bright start, less windy, clouding over with a little rain and drizzle, and turning milder next week. Here's the summary for the next 24 hours. Some heavy rain tonight, and watch out for those strong winds tomorrow. Lucy.
Thank you for the warning, Derek. And that is Wales Today. I'll be back with the latest after the BBC News at 10. But for now, from all of us on the programme, thanks so much for your company. Have a great evening, and I'll see you later. Hwyl fawr.